We're coming to the end of months of furious speculating.
You will have to put up taxes.
I could do what previous governments have done, which is to sweep those challenges under the carpet.
And U-turning.
ITV News understands the Chancellor won't raise the basic rate of income tax in her budget after all.
I think it is really important that we stick to our manifesto.
As the Chancellor finalises her second budget, she's always warned of having to make difficult choices. But who will feel it the hardest?
She needs to raise a lot of money. It's a more hidden tax rise, but it is still a tax rise.
And will it make the Prime Minister more vulnerable than ever to a leadership challenge?
Anybody who might want to be leader will want Keir Starmer to take the pain.
And what's behind this unusual social media video where he addresses his own son?
Spending time with you is one of the highlights of my week, whether it's a takeaway or going to watch the Arsenal.
Once you have crossed that line and brought your family into politics, it's incredibly hard to retreat. I think he is taking a bit of a risk here.
Hello and welcome to Talking Politics. I'm Paul Brand.
And I'm Robert Peston.
We are just days away from that budget, which has been trailed for weeks, if not months. Lots of chatter about what's in it, what's not in it. We kind of know now what's not going to be in it, which is a rise in income tax. At least that's the latest indication anyway from the government. But what will be in it? Well, Kemi Badenoch tried to get some answers from Keir Starmer on that at Prime Minister's Questions.
This is the first budget to unravel before it's even been delivered. So can he confirm today that he won't break another promise by freezing income tax thresholds?
Mr. Speaker, the budget is 1 week today and we will lay out our plans. What we won't do is inflict austerity on the country as they did. Cause huge. What we won't do is inflict a borrowing spree like Liz Truss did.
It is quite clear that they are going to freeze thresholds. We didn't get a clear answer from them, but this is really important. Why was freezing thresholds a breach of the manifesto last year, but it isn't this year?
Mr. Speaker, every week she comes along and speculates and distorts.
Mr. Speaker, he talks about speculation. The only people who've been speculating are his government every single day for the last 3 months.
So, Robert, that didn't really get us anywhere, did it, today with Prime Minister's Questions? Although I guess we should have learned by now that you don't get anywhere until the budget's actually announced, whether you're Kemi Badenoch or journalists like us asking questions repeatedly. But on this budget, there have been signals from the government, and Rachel Reeves made that massive speech where she basically hinted at, significant tax rises. You were certainly expecting those to be income tax rises because of the briefings that were coming out. Now we're told it probably won't be income tax rises, or almost certainly won't be income tax rises. What does that mean, and where have we been left with all of this?
They were very worried about being accused of breaking their election manifesto, which said that the income tax rate wouldn't go up, and their sort of excuse for it is that actually the public finances are not going to be as bad. They're not, or rather the forecast from the OBR of the public finances will not show as big a hole as the Chancellor thought when she did that unprecedented extraordinary press conference in Downing Street, where she basically said we were all going to have to contribute to the effort to fix the hole in the public finances. So we should get the facts out there. There has been a U-turn on. This is not gossip and speculation. There has been a U-turn in terms of raising the basic rate of income tax. But Kemi Badenoch was onto something today in Prime Minister's Questions. What she said was that, what she was trying to get from the Prime Minister was a commitment, one way or another, not to extend the freeze on the thresholds at which we pay these different rates for another couple of years. And just to be clear, I absolutely confidently expect that in the budget on Wednesday, they will extend the freeze on the thresholds at which people pay the 40 and 45p rates of tax, and indeed the thresholds relating to other taxes as well, potentially. But certainly when it comes to income tax, those thresholds will be frozen. And that means that people who are not currently paying the 40p or the 45p rates of tax will find themselves, because their wages go up, paying those rates of tax over the next few years. And that raises a lot of money. The forecast, the current forecasts for what extending those threshold freezes for another couple of years, what they say is those forecasts are saying that that will raise about £8 billion of extra tax for the government. And that's a lot of money. That is an income tax rise. It's a more hidden tax rise than increasing the basic rate of income tax, but it is still a tax rise. And the politics. I mean, let's be just on Prime Minister's questions. Kemi Badenoch didn't express herself brilliantly well at the beginning. She stumbled a bit, but the point she's making is a perfectly good political point, which is only a year ago, the Chancellor did say in the House of Commons that she would not be freezing these thresholds for another couple of years. She has changed her mind, and her language in the House of Commons, and this is the most embarrassing thing for the Chancellor, her language in the House of Commons implied that she believed that extending the thresholds at which we pay these taxes for another couple of years would be, in effect, a breach of Labour's manifesto. So that is, that is embarrassing for the government, that is what they're going to do. And so Badenoch, we should be under no illusion, is onto something here.
Yeah, and I think for voters, right, whether or not technically Rachel Reeves has managed to stick to the manifesto or broken it, if they're paying more tax, they're paying more tax, and they're going to feel that by the next election. If they're dragged into those higher bands and they have to start paying it sooner than they should have done, they're going to feel annoyed about that. What else should we expect from the budget? I mean, I've seen a lot of talk in the papers about a so-called mansion tax. Do you think that's likely?
Yeah, so I'll just run through the other measures. There will be, unless there's an absolute last minute panic change of heart, there will be a sort of newish tax to extract more from people who own expensive properties. My current understanding is that it won't be one of the ideas that they floated, which was a 1% levy on properties worth more than £2 million, but it is more likely to be a new council tax band, or indeed council tax bans on much more expensive properties. In both cases, however, there are problems. I mean, one of them is we haven't had a proper revaluation of properties since 1991. And so simply getting the data to make sure that those who genuinely live in these more expensive properties are the ones who are paying the tax, that'll be challenging. There is a risk if they do it in a sort of quick and dirty way that some people pay the tax who shouldn't be paying it, and other people, who should be paying the tax don't end up paying it, because an enormous amount has happened to the property market over, the last more than, 35 years or so since there was a proper revaluation. And, you only have to look in any town or city or part of the country, and, there have been massive relative changes. Some areas have massively soared in terms of house prices, and some have stagnated. And so it has the potential to create quite a lot of unfairnesses. We've got a fairly, certainly in London and the South East, property market is currently in pretty poor shape. And so, one potential impact of this, which would undermine confidence and growth, would be it causes a bit of a property slump. And, then there is just a third problem, which is, quite a lot of people may be asked to pay it, who may have valuable properties, but they have those valuable properties because they've been living there for 30, 40 years, but they don't have a lot of income. And so this is a messy and complicated set of changes. But this is a government that still needs the money. They're going to have to raise about £25 billion, partly because the OBR is more, we've talked about this a lot, more pessimistic about the outlook for productivity and growth. Productivity is output per person or output per unit of capital raised. When they're more pessimistic about growth, it means they're more pessimistic about tax revenues. However, in some ways, tax revenues are a little bit better than they expected, particularly following last year's rise in taxes. The net effect of this is there is a basic hole to fill of 20 billion quid, which is a lot of money, and then they're rebuilding the sort of margin for error, what's called headroom. So that's another 5 billion they have to raise, and then maybe another 3 or 4 billion for various measures they want to push through, including ending the 2-child limit on universal credit. This is just a long way around of saying she needs to raise a lot of money, and doing a levy on those with more expensive properties is something that will be popular with a large number of her MPs. If very unpopular, if you happen to be somebody living in one of these properties and you don't have a very large income.
Yeah, for example, pensioners or whatever that have been living in them for years,
or young people who happen to have taken out an enormous blooming mortgage are paying way higher interest rates than they expected to be paying. For those people, this will be a big kick in the teeth, and a lot of those people are Labour voters.
I wanted to ask you about interest rates, actually, because inflation, the latest figures came out this week, 3.6%, which is relatively good news. And now there's even more speculation that there'll be another rate cut before Christmas. Does that help the Chancellor at all?
Yeah, of course. The rate cuts are always enormously helpful for the government because they just create a better environment. I don't think it'll particularly help the amount of money she has to raise in the short term, because it's a little bit too late for the Office of Budget Responsibility to adjust its forecasts of what the government is going to have to pay itself in terms of interest rates. But faster declines in interest rates are definitely something the government would always welcome. On those inflation figures, worth pointing out, however, that it was sort of mixed news. Yes, the headline rate is coming down, but food price inflation is really quite high at 4.9%. And that is particularly painful for those on low incomes who are already struggling with bills. So if that food price inflation does not come down, that is very painful. It's one of the reasons why this is a government that constantly says, at the moment, this big message at the moment is it's going to do stuff about the cost of living. I confidently expect them to say something in the budget about trying to bring energy bills down, perhaps by shifting some of the sort of energy, the sort of green transition levies into general taxation. But in general, it just points to another one of the problems for this government, which is at the top end there are quite a lot of potential Labour voters, as I say, who are going to be uncomfortable about being whacked with things like a mansion tax, and at the bottom end there are lots of people who are just struggling with the cost of living. It's not an easy time to be a Chancellor.
Or indeed a Prime Minister. And I want to talk to you about leadership as well, Robert. And a couple of things stood out to me this week. I mean, obviously we had the whole debacle with Wes Streeting last week, and then this week the Prime Minister was trying to get back on the front foot. He did a couple of things that stood out to us, didn't he? One for me was that front page of the Mirror newspaper where he did an interview with the newspaper and said, I will go and lead Labour into the next election, which is never a good sign when a leader's got to spell that out in black and white. And possibly, another sign of his weakness and the expectation of the opposite, really, that someone else is going to lead them into the next election. And then secondly, you spotted this on Instagram, which is kind of curious, from Keir Starmer, talking about his son for the first time in this kind of way, at least that I've noticed before. Let's just have a little listen to what he had to say in this video.
Almost unbelievably, you're already 17. You're taller than I am. And you've grown into a confident, kind, wonderful young man. And I'm so proud of you. Now, I didn't have a very close relationship with my own dad. When my mum, your grandma Jo, was sick, and she was very sick, he cared for her devotedly. But he and I never really spoke. We never really got to know each other. And I was determined that my relationship with you was going to be different. I know there are pressures on young men that are difficult to talk about.
This was interesting. This was for International Men's Day. Obviously, he's addressing his own son there. As you pointed out to me, Robert, earlier today, Keir Starmer said he wasn't going to do this sort of thing. In fact, I remember interviewing him in the run up to the election for the Tonight programme, and he really said, "Look, I'm going to keep my son and daughter out of politics, and indeed my wife, as much as I can." But he has made this very personal video today, and I just wonder if it's partly about trying to show a bit more of himself again and deal with the leadership issue. What do you think?
I think there's been a widespread view that since the election, the sort of media approach from the government hasn't been that successful and hasn't looked very modern. Right now, Labour is suffering because there are two leaders in the case of Zach Belansky, leader of the Greens, and Nigel Farage, leader of Reform, who do seem incredibly comfortable with social media and communicating in this noisy, complicated, chaotic digital world in a way that, frankly, neither Kemi Baden nor Keir Starmer really have been and really are. So this was an Instagram reel that we've just done we've just shown a clip of, and it is definitely an attempt by the Prime Minister, egged on obviously by those who advise him, to show more of his, more of who he is as a person. One of the things I did find annoying was, rather than just him speaking, there is this sort of plinky plonky, supposedly sensitive music in the background, which is incredibly annoying. But I sort of did think that he came across as more sort of who he really is than he often does. You I think slightly disagree with me. You think it's a bit forced and a bit phony.
Yeah.
But the big point, though, the big political point, which you alluded to, and it is a big political point, is the Prime Minister did repeatedly say in the run up to the election, and indeed subsequently, that he was determined to totally protect his family from the limelight. And although he never names his son and daughter, this is a very, very, very public, he talks about his wife and his daughter and his son in this very public space, Instagram. And I was a bit surprised that he's done that. I'm sure he would say that it's in absolutely a good cause, because what the thing that he's highlighting are the mental health struggles of young people today, young men today, is what he was focused on in this this video. And he wanted, and it's a letter to his son saying he understands that the terrible psychological pressures on all young people, and he very much loves his son and he's there for him. And the best thing about his relationship, he says, is that he and his son do communicate and do talk in a way that he struggled to do with his own father, which I think is a message that lots of people, particularly lots of men, will empathize with. But as I say, I thought it sort of worked, but I don't think you do you?
No, I've got absolutely no doubt how much he cares about his family, and I think anyone who's talked to him about this in private, as I'm sure you have as well, it really comes across just how much he does care for his children and his wife. I think for me, the issue with it is he just doesn't look comfortable talking about it still. I still don't think that he feels fully happy that he's sitting there at his desk in number 10 discussing his son. It doesn't quite work for me. I think the message is an important one. Like you say, no, I'm the father of a son myself. He's not quite teenager yet, but I've got no doubt this is a massive, massive issue for lots of dads and lots of sons trying to talk about these issues. And he sort of touched on the theme of adolescence this year, the Netflix drama, which talks about, the toxic masculinity and the issues around radicalizing men online and all that sort of stuff, or boys online. So important message,
I suppose
but I'm just not convinced that he's comfortable with it.
Yeah, and who can blame him for not being comfortable with it? Because in a way, my concern for him, and indeed his family, just a sort of normal concern that one would have for any people, is once you have, in a sense, crossed that line and brought your family into politics, it's incredibly hard to retreat. And he has now sort of given license to the media to take an interest in his wife and children in the way that up to now, I think the media is slightly laid off. And so I think it is, I think he is taking a bit of a risk here in personalizing these important messages in this way. And I mean, and I hope, obviously, for sort of his and his family's sake, that these are not risks that they subsequently regret.
So coming back to leadership then, Robert, where do you think we're at this week? Because last week was chaotic, as we know. Has that gone away now? Has the threat gone away? Have things calmed down? Or is Keir Starmer very much still on, if not resignation watch, then what's the word? Sacking watch or coup watch?
So there's absolutely no question that the chaotic Downing Street briefings that the Prime Minister would never leave office quietly, that he would fight any challenger, that he was the bulwark, the protection against, essentially the country's financial collapse. These were sort of weird and I think self-harming briefings. Obviously, the most self-harming of all, which the Prime Minister says he didn't authorize, though he did authorize the other things I've just been talking about. The most damaging of all was highlighting Wes Streeting, the Health Secretary, as the principal threat, the principal challenger. All of that was, in my view, completely unnecessary and harmful, for the very simple reason that most of us, and this certainly includes me, did not think he would face a leadership challenge soon. My view has been for certainly 2 or 3 months that if the May local elections are terrible for Labour and the national elections in Scotland and Wales, then he will be, it was my view that the Labour Party would at that point think about whether they needed to replace their leader. And that was the point of maximum risk for him, maximum threat that he'd be thrown out. And I was literally staggered that, in a sense, he felt he needed to defend himself as early as this. And there's no question in my mind that both that botched Downing Street operation plus the U-turn, which I've already talked about, on raising the basic rate of income tax, both of those debacles, disasters, misjudgments have definitely undermined confidence in the Prime Minister, and indeed undermined confidence in his Chancellor Rachel Reeves. They are both damaged. For what it's worth, I still, however, think, even though they are weaker, I still think that there won't be a challenge before the May local elections. And the reason,
But not after
for
the
that,
budget. Not after the budget, no.
No, I don't think so. Look, if the budget was catastrophically bad in terms of both market and political reaction, and therefore there was a growing view among Labour MPs that unless they change the leadership and change direction, the damage to Labour would be irredeemably bad. There's obviously a small probability that there'll be a revolt at that point, but it is not, frankly, it's not, to use that cliche, my sort of central scenario. I think that's a fairly small probability. And because apart from anything else, if you are somebody like Wes Streeting or Shabana Mahmood or anybody else who might fancy themselves as leader one day, it's pretty risky apart from anything else, to take over before the very likely calamity of those elections in May. Because, broadly, you will be tarnished with them if you take over before that. So anybody who actually
Very
might want
good
to be
point.
leader will want, anybody who might want to be leader will want Keir Starmer to take the pain. Now, as I say, if the budget is an absolute catastrophe, the calculations change. But no, so I think he's weakened, but I don't think he's down and out. And I think the one thing that we should say is, when it comes to it, whenever the moment of truth is, it is a massive, massive calculation for somebody who wants to be leader, and indeed the 80 odd supporters who need to be, grouped together. In order for there to be a leadership challenge, 80 Labour MPs have to club together and basically announce they've got no confidence in the Prime Minister. That is enormously, that's, if you just think about the chaos of the last few years and the damage done to the Tory party by all those changes of leader, when the moment of truth comes, whether in the end Labour MPs will jump, I think is still a moot question. So when Starmer said to the Mirror that he expects to be leader at the next election, that's not a completely crazy thing for him to have said. Partly, as I say, because although what will focus Labour minds is whether or not they'll keep their seats, the judgment about whether more of them will lose if there's yet more chaos and a change of leader, whether fewer of them will lose if there's yet more chaos and a change of leader than if they even if they stick with somebody they regard as a bit disappointing. It's a very hard judgment to make.
Yeah, well, look, this one we'll definitely come back to. And of course, we'll be returning to the budget next week for a bumper episode of Talking Politics. But we've got to leave it there for this week. Thanks so much, Robert. And thank you all for listening and watching.
That's goodbye from me.